Hey, today we're going over pressure volume loops. So let's jump right into it. It's pretty straightforward. Let's see if I can, is that good enough? Yeah, you can see. Okay, so this is a pressure volume loop. It kind of has it's a loop, so it kind of has this weird kind of trapezoidal shape to it. And that's because within a cardiac cycle, you'll go, it's kind of circular. You'll fill up, you'll pump out, you'll fill up again, you'll pump out. So on our graph here, we have pressure on the left, volume on the bottom, volume in milliliters, pressure in millimeters of mercury, or milliliters for volume, millimeters of mercury for pressure, pretty standard. And here's our cycle. And I've labeled it with acronyms to make it a little bit more compact. But let's start here. So this is when our ventricles have just gone through a cycle and they are empty. And so this part A is diastole, which is when you're filling up the ventricles. So VF right at this point is when your ventricles are filling. So as you go up, you'll notice the pressure is slightly changing, but not too much. And your volume is greatly changing from about 50 to 120. And you're going to get to a point where you're filled all the way. And this is when your mitral valve closes. The mitral valve being between the atria and your ventricles. When the pressure exceeds when the pressure in the ventricle exceeds the pressure in the atria, that's when your mitral valve will close because it pushes against that trap door. Okay, and now what's going to happen? Well, we need to increase the pressure. That's when our ventricle pumps, but it's not going to immediately pump out blood yet. So as you can see, we're not changing in volume yet, but we are increasing pressure. Once we get to a certain point where our pressure in the ventricle exceeds the pressure in the aorta, your aortic ventricular valve will open. And once that opens, B is when isovolumic contraction occurs. You're contracting your ventricles, etc. AO, AV valve opens. You will allow the blood into the aorta. That's what happens. And the C component is ejection. That's when the blood finally rushes out. Then we're gonna see our volume decrease. We're going right to left. And then we're gonna reach a point where our aortic valve closes. Or our atrioventricular valve closes between the aorta and the ventricle. And that's because in the aorta, there's the trap door, the semilunar valves, they close. And once they close, we need to drop our pressure back down. As you notice, we're not losing any volume, we're not gaining any volume, we're just dropping pressure. And that's when the relaxation of the ventricles happens. So yeah, D, isovolumic relax. No change in volume, just change in pressure. Then ventricular filling happens again, right at 50 or right down here at this apex here. We need to start our cycle over again, fill the ventricle, and let her fly. These two lines are kind of important depending on the elasticity or compliance of the chambers that you're talking about. In this case, your ventricle. You're going to have different slopes for these, and it determines how much pressure is needed to get volume into a certain chamber. So if you have on here, you don't need a lot of pressure. See this rise here? You don't need a lot of pressure to get back up your volume to 120. But up here, when you're at high pressure, you need a lot of pressure to get a little bit of volume when you're all the way up here. So more volume or more pressure to get a little bit of volume at high pressure, more or for here, less pressure to get a lot more volume. So these are your end systolic pressure volume relationships, and that's your end diastolic pressure volume relationships. With diastole, you don't need a lot of pressure to get volume. And end systolic pressure volume relationships, you need quite a bit of pressure to get a little bit of volume into a certain chamber. So that's your pressure volume loop and kind of the steps, just working your way around. One last thing I forgot to mention is SV. This is just your stroke volume. If you stretch this, you increase your volume, and if you increase your volume within the chamber, then you're going to push a lot more out. And that happens with exercise or other physiological states of the body. So that's your pressure volume loop for you.